All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Appeal. This is the continuing hearing for the premises located 936 Brush Hill Road under the provisions of Chapter 40B. My name is Frank O'Brien. I will be chairing this meeting. Joining me, as always, are my two fellow board members, Jeff Mullen and Nick Gray. So we have a fairly extensive agenda for this evening, and we have had a number of filings that have been made since the last meeting. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to briefly apprise folks who may be listening this evening regarding the filings that have been made. Then, as a courtesy, because of a scheduling matter, I'm going to ask the town engineer, Maria Fernandez, to make a few remarks. And then we will move on to Mr. Reardon. Then I'm going to ask Mr. Schomer to make a few comments based upon the last hearing, and then we'll move on from there. So since the last meeting, we have had several submissions, including engineering and traffic peer review documentation, design peer review documentation. Those were filed on June 24th and June 27th, respectively. On July 1, we had some test pit data, which was filed. July 11th, we had some brief comments filed by Chief Madden relatives to various access issues. And then today, we had some comments which were filed by the town engineer. So with that, all of those materials are available on the town's website in the 90B location, and I would recommend those documents to you for folks who are interested in this proceeding. So with that, I want to welcome the town engineer to the board this evening, and knowing that she has some scheduling issues, she's requested to go early in the hearing, and as a courtesy, I've decided to allow that. So Maria Fernandez, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the entire planning board. I provided a letter today to the board, and it stated my review of the plans dated May 25th, 2022. I do not have any major concerns. We are expecting a water capacity study as stated in Mr. Reardon's letter dated June 24th. And also I added a few more details on that end, nothing too major. On the stormwater, again, I believe that the review from Mr. Reardon was very comprehensive. I also had a call to review some questions there, and his comments are in line with my thoughts. On the sewer, we are expecting a sewer inspection as noted in Mr. Reardon's note number 28. And also wanna let the applicant know that all of the utility connections will be subject to the engineering department's just regular protocol, where they will have to come in and take permits associated with utilities connections, and those utility connections will have to be done by a drain layer, which is nothing out of ordinary. That was my letter in a nutshell. I was wondering if you had any question, or if the applicant had any questions. I'll be more than happy to respond.
Thank you, Ms. Fernandez. We appreciate your being here this evening, your comments, and your letter. I'm going to ask the members of the board, Mr. Gray, Mr. Mullen, if they have any questions or comments that they'd like to direct to Ms. Fernandez.
Not at this time.
Um, At this point, I do not have any questions. What I'd like to do, Mr. Schomer, I'm going to reserve uh, some time for you to provide any comments you might want to make regarding Ms. Fernandez's letter in a few moments. But at this point in time, I think I'd like to, continuing with the engineering stuff, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Reardon to make some comments regarding the materials that he has filed and any additional comments he may want to make relative to Ms. Fernandez's letter. So, Mr. Reardon.
Good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Sean Reardon with Tetra Tech. We're the ZBA's peer review consultant. As Marina mentioned, I filed a letter on June 24th, I think it was, that outlined all my sort of detailed comments. I think we're at the point, through a lot of good work by the design team and the applicant and the board, a plan that works pretty well considering the density that's being proposed. A really significant improvement over what we initially saw. At this point, we're left with really some minor issues. I had one big concern outstanding last time we met, which was the lack of test pit information, and the applicant has provided 2 additional test pits that are sort of well located to give a good sort of understanding of what the underlying soil conditions are. And as Paul had mentioned last time, is they pretty much confirm the test pits that they used in their analysis. So it didn't really require any changes to the plans. It just basically provided enough data for us to say with a high degree of confidence that the underlying conditions are understood well enough to support the design. We do have some sort of minor issues that I think are relatively easily addressed, but are still important to address. So I'm hoping that those get taken care of in a final plan set. Some of those include just adding a staircase to provide access along the backside of the building. What made me think of that was the testimony given by the neighbor that's with the fire department, who's talking about the challenges of fighting a fire on that side of the building. And I realized that there was really no way for the fire department to access that backside of the building from the front of the building. So I think what we asked for was a staircase on that side. Then some minor drainage changes meant to basically relieve some of the pressure that could end up going to the neighbor and instead direct it to the street. So with those changes, I think we'd be in a pretty good spot.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Reardon. Have you touched bases with the chief regarding the staircase issue?
We haven't talked specifically with the chief about the staircase, but we did have a meeting with the chief and the applicants to sort of review the layout. It admittedly didn't come up, but it was something I felt was pretty important to add in.
Okay. Thank you. Questions from the board? Mr. Mullen.
On the site visit that involved the fire chief, was the resident who was a member of the Boston Fire present?
I wasn't at a meeting on site with the fire chief.
Oh, I thought there was was there not in between these meetings, was there not a meeting with the fire chief on site?
Not that I attended.
Mr. Mullen, we never scheduled anything like that.
So what was the basis of Chief Madden's memo? Just based on a review of the drawings?
Yeah, and we had a Zoom meeting with Chief Madden too as well, and the design team.
Okay. I thought in the last meeting there was going to be scheduled a meeting where the resident who was expressing concern about the ability to fight the fire was going to be present, but I could be wrong. I thought that was that's where we were headed with this. And then when I read Chief Madden's memo, I thought that was the product of the meeting, but I'm mistaken.
Mr. Mullen, I don't think that you were mistaken. I was left with the impression that there was going to be some sort of a conflab involving some of the parties And I believe that Mr. Sawinski had endeavored to put something like that together, but it's my understanding, and Mr. Sawinski, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there was no actual meeting or no physical meeting between the parties, no written submissions, as far as I know, relative to the concerns that were expressed by uh, the Boston Fire Department members. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we had requested in advance of a meeting with Chief Madden, just a sort of a transcript of some of the issues that were raised during testimony at the last hearing, just so Chief Madden could be prepared to kind of review those issues and kind of, go over with his staff if they were concerned with any of that. So we had never actually gotten those written comments. Chief Madden is available to meet. I didn't want to have him sit down for a meeting and not be fully prepared to answer any questions that the residents have had. So I had gotten in touch with Attorney Galvin about that. I did not get those written comments in advance. If they do come in, we're happy to set up a meeting with Chief Madden to go over those issues. But so Chief Madden's comments are based on his extensive involvement of the review of this project, both with his own staff and with the design team and Sean Reardon through multiple working sessions.
Thank you, Tim. Mr. Mullen, additional questions?
Well, I feel like at a minimum, the chief should have the opportunity to review the details that were expressed by the neighbor who also happens to work for the Boston Fire Department. I feel like if I were the chief, I'd like to see that. I mean, that was a pretty extensive presentation in my experience on these hearings. I mean, pretty rare. And I would encourage it. I mean, I don't want to drag this out any more than I'll leave it to the professionals as to whether or not an on-site meeting is necessary. But I do think the chief's memo, knowing that he didn't have an opportunity to review the notes, I just think about it a little bit differently. In other words, I've reviewed all the data, including the testimony, is very different than I review the data, only because there might be some nuggets of information in there that he would appreciate. So that's my observation. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Gray, any questions or comments?
No, I have no questions other than the issues Mr. Mullen raised.
Thank you. Just want to make sure that, and perhaps Crystal can assist us with this. I just want to make sure that there is no one from Mr. Galvin or someone who was involved in the fire chief related discussion is not out as one of the participants.
In the attendees list?
That's correct.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I'm not sure. Burnett, they've had their hand up pretty much since we started. And then C. Newman. Do either of those names sound familiar? No.
No.
Okay.
All right. We will give them an opportunity to comment when the public portion of the meeting takes place. So.
Carol, Brian, if I could add one thing. I was out at the site today. I just want to remind the applicant that we're still looking for documentation on the site distance triangles, in particular the relationship of the site distance to the stone wall on the Curry College side. So we're hoping to see that as well.
All right. I think
Mr. Chair, can I just try to put a pin in the fire chief issue real quick?
Please.
Yeah, so again, my suggestion for Attorney Galvin and his clients to submit some written comments, I just thought it would be quicker and easier. I thought that would turn around relatively hastily after that hearing. Chief Madden's not here tonight. He's actually at a fire station building committee meeting. So otherwise he would have been here to answer any questions that the board had. You know, if those written comments are not going to come and the board would like me to ask Chief Madden to just review the tape and give us his thoughts on those comments, we can certainly do that. I had been corresponding with Attorney Galvin. I thought we would be getting a memo with some written comments. So it's not, I don't think anything necessarily slipped through the cracks or anything. It was just, you know, but if the board is interested in his commentary on those specific issues, you know, we can get him the tape and he can take a little time and review that if that's something that the board's interested in.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen.
Yeah, I am interested in that. I'm not interested in having the chief spend a lot of time going through tapes of the Board of Appeals meetings. That's how the members of the board spend their free time. But not important town officials. I do think it would be helpful to roll up the portion of the transcript or some type of summary and give that to the chief. And if I was the chief, I'd appreciate that. And I think
I think Mr. Mullen.
Like I said, I'll leave that to others.
Jeff, you froze for about
I'm sorry.
2 minutes. You froze for about 2 minutes.
Oh, I was saying that I think that either a transcript or a summary of that testimony should be made available to the chief, and some record should be made that he's had the opportunity to review it and supplement the writing. I think that's important, and for context, as to whether or not a site visit is necessary, you know, I don't feel as strongly about that because I think you can see a lot from drawings. But so I'll leave that to others, but I definitely think the chief should have the opportunity to take a look at the testimony.
The testimony was from Lieutenant Dwayne Day from the last meeting.
Yeah, that's good.
That's what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'll make those arrangements first thing in the morning.
Yeah, but like I said, Tim, you know, he shouldn't have to wind his way through our tapes, you know? That's what Frank does on Saturdays.
I mean, it was about 10 minutes worth of testimony. I can find the sort of the mark on the tape and just advise him to kind of just fast forward. It shouldn't be that bad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Let me join in agree, also supporting Mr. Mullen's suggestion regarding that, and as I'm sure Mr. Gray does as well. So
agreed.
That's an important issue, and I want to make sure that we leave no stone unturned on that issue. All right. I think at this time, Mr. Schomer, I think I'd like to turn it over to you. There were a number of presentations made at the last meeting by some of their neighbors and their council. In addition, there were some additional submissions made. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, Chairman O'Brien. Just to briefly follow up on a couple of points that were just under discussion. If Chief Madden would like to have an opportunity to have a site walk, we're certainly willing to accommodate him and provide our team to participate in that if he would find that helpful. And I'll work with Tim Zerwinski on making the arrangements if Chief Madden does want to do that. Regarding a point that Mr. Reardon made during his comments a few minutes ago about the sightline triangles for the site, which was an issue that was also brought up last week by Attorney Galvin, I believe. We're in the process of arranging for additional survey of the site to provide the backup for that. So that's in process. It's been delayed a little bit due to the 4th of July holiday, but we're hoping to have our surveyors out there this week or next week at the latest. We'll provide the updated survey information for Mr. Reardon's review as soon as we have that. Also, because I know you mentioned, Mr. O'Brien, that Town Engineer Fernandez has a scheduling issue tonight, and I didn't want to hold her up. We did have an opportunity to review her letter. We had no concerns, no problems with any of the comments that she made. Those were all, I would say, fairly standard matters, and we're certainly willing to have those memorialized in conditions for this project to ensure that her comments are addressed. The one point of question that she had was in her letter regarding the dimensions of the bus stop pad at the front of the site. And I can confirm to her that the dimensions of that are 7 feet by 7.5 feet. And that connects to a 5-foot wide sidewalk. So the total size of that area in the front of the site is 12 feet by 7.5 feet. Certainly, we're willing to work with the town regarding the size of that if that's not sufficient. If a different dimension is preferred, and we can work that out in conditions, I think. But that's certainly what we're proposing at this point. Turning to the comments that were made last by Attorney Galvin and his consultants and his clients, we're in the process of preparing written responses to all of those, as well as responses to to Mr. Reardon's comment letter and Mr. Bomer's comment letter, as well as the recent letters that have come in from Chief Madden and Engineer Fernandez. So at this time, Mr. Chair, I'd like to reserve comment on that until the written submissions are ready. We will be providing that probably within the next couple of weeks, and we would be intending to include with that updated revised plans to reflect the plan amendments that have been made based on the commentary that we've received to date.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Schumer. So additional written comments with updated revised plans will be forthcoming. What's your best guesstimate?
We're working through that now, Mr. Chair. I think we're looking at if I can look at my calendar here. Our next meeting is scheduled for sometime in August, I believe, perhaps the 10th of August. And I think we're shooting for the next meeting to have revised plans. But just to be clear, the revisions to the plans, they're minor. They're just tweaks here and there. Things like Sean mentioned, we're looking into the feasibility of adding some kind of stairs or making accessible to the rear of the building. So for the most part, the plans are in their final form now, but we do have some minor revisions.
I think you said August 10th. I believe, hopefully we haven't gotten our calculations mixed up, but isn't our next meeting the 3rd? August 3.
You may be right about that, Mr. Chair. Well, I defer to you and to Mr. Zerwinski to
maybe Tim and Crystal could check our calculations there. I will defer to the experts.
The 3 weeks from today is the 3rd.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right.
That evening, Mr. Bryan, this is just a logistical thing for myself. I will be away that week. I'm not sure about my Wi-Fi access at where I'll be. So I'm happy to participate by Zoom if I'm able to, but I will be out of the country that day.
Thank you. I think we all are going to be challenged with some vacations, as am I, and I'm sure others. All right. Those are logistical issues that we can work through, and if we need to, we need to delay the final things by a meeting cycle or two. I think that's certainly doable because I think we're all moving in the right direction here. And there's light at the end of the tunnel, but we need to have the full participation by all of the parties continuing. All right. At this point in time, I think the next thing that I had on my agenda was, and I don't know, Mr. Shermer, if you're ready to do this, is the waiver list.
Yes, I am prepared to go through that with you, Mr. O'Brien.
All right. Before you begin that, let me just pause and ask at this particular point in time if anybody has any of the members have any additional questions or comments.
No.
Okay. Ms. Fernandez, I know that you had some scheduling issues. You're welcome to stay. But I think at this point, also, if you wanted to join the members of the board in that pastime known as reviewing the Board of Appeals hearings, I think that that would be made available to you as well. So.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time and letting me be part of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your help. All right. I know Ms. Fernandez had some additional responsibilities for this evening. So Attorney Schumer, back to you.
All right. So if I may, Mr. Chair, I'll share my screen and put up the waiver list. This list is being updated as of today. I was in contact with Mr. Zerwinski, and he requested that I take another look at the waiver list to confirm that all of the waiver requests are current. There are a few minor revisions. I'll explain what those are when we go through the list here. But for the most part, this is unchanged from what was previously submitted. And I will, of course, file this for record as soon as we get off this call. Can everyone see the screen that I have up with the spreadsheet of the waiver list? Everybody okay?
I can now.
Yes.
There we go. Okay. So this is noted the revised waiver list. It'll be dated as of today and submitted for record. The majority of the waivers that we're requesting, Mr. Chair, have to do with the Milton zoning bylaw, and I'll get to that in just a moment. There is one initial bylaw that comes first. It's Chapter 6 of the Milton general bylaws. It's the Milton Police Regulation Bylaw, which requires at Section 33 a permit from the Milton Select Board to break or dig up the ground in any street or sidewalk for any purpose. And it continues there. We are requesting in this waiver, Mr. Chair, only that the permit is required by the Milton Select Board of this section be issued instead by the Board of Appeals as part of the comprehensive permit for the project. This a similar waiver request was submitted for the previously approved projects at 582 Blue Hill Avenue and 648 Canton Avenue. And my recollection is that there was a condition that was imposed on this condition requiring compliance with the select board and any applicable bylaw technical requirements here, but otherwise approving this waiver only to the extent that we are not required to seek an additional permit from the select board to do the curb cut and street sidewalk opening for this project. So this kind of waiver, and we'll have a few of these, and I'll mention them tonight, I would describe as process waivers, and they're primarily to ensure that the comprehensive permit encompasses all local permits that are issued by various boards and permitting authorities in the town of Milton. So moving from there to the zoning bylaw, the first one that we have here.
I'm sorry, can I just ask a question
sure.
on that? Would you mind? And this is to Tim. One of the issues with this one, well, a thing to remind or at least the applicant of, is on Blue Hill Avenue we had a state highway, and it was even questionable as to the applicability of this with respect to the main access. So Brush Hill Road is a scenic highway, or it's a scenic road. So the reason I interrupted is I think it would be helpful to get a specific recommendation from the town planner on these issues, because if we're replacing the select board's jurisdiction for ours, I don't fundamentally object to that in light of the purpose of the comprehensive permit. I get that. But we're gonna want a recommendation from a professional as to how that all works and whether that's appropriate and whether, you know, in particular, how that squares with how the select board would ordinarily do that. So that's really, and it's not directed to the applicant as much as it is to Tim, and just make him aware of what I think would be helpful to evaluate the appropriateness of this particular one. So that's point one. And then point two is I'd be interested in how that intersects with the scenic road bylaw. It's not a scenic road bylaw. It's an enforcement of a general law that the town has adopted and named Brush Hill Road a scenic road. So, right, that's the status of that, right? Chapter 40, section 15C.
Yes. So, Mr. Muller, just a couple things. So in the past on other comprehensive permits, effectively what we've done is put a condition in the permit that includes all of the performance requirements that are meant to be enforced by this particular bylaw, and just simply taken away the select board permit. So the select board, in issuing that permit, and I'll have to get a little bit more clarity from DPW and from the select board office on exactly how that permitting process actually goes. But it is really a staff-driven, process by which the folks in DPW will sort of, make their evaluation and their recommendation to the select board and whatever. So I think in terms of the performance standards that the bylaw is trying to protect, we've been able to appropriately condition, permits in the past for that. But I'll get a little bit more clarity as to sort of what the normal process is, just so the board understands exactly what it is it's waiving, in this particular case.
Thank you.
And then relative to the scenic road regulations, which as Mr. Mullen states, is not a bylaw. It's actually a regulation in the planning board regulations. But it is the way that we do opt into Chapter 40, Section 15C. It's just like any other regulation that gets waived. Same thing as setbacks, same thing as height, same thing as use. What the planning board would typically do in a scenic road permitting process is if you're destroying, if you're taking down any trees in the town right of way, or if you're destroying any stone walls up to 18 or more linear feet of stone wall in the town right of way, you need to get a scenic road permit from the planning board. So I would ask the applicant if, just to confirm that they are in fact taking down trees in the town right of way or disturbing 18 or more linear feet of stone wall. In which case, if the answer is no, then no waiver is required because there's no scenic road action that would have normally been taken. And then if they are doing one of those two things, then they'll need to specifically request a waiver. But the scenic road regulations are really kind of pretty strictly about trees and stone walls in the town right of way. And that's really it. So that would be a question I have for the applicant.
I can confirm on that, Mr. Chair, through you, of course, that there are no trees or stone walls that will be taken down in the town right of way.
Thank you, Mr. Schumer. It strikes me that there may be several other waivers in this list that, similar to what we just discussed regarding the street opening, that the performance standards would be included in the as a condition, if appropriate, in situations where the comprehensive permit is, I guess I could characterize it as taking the place of the select board. One of them that comes to mind is signage, for example, I think would be something in that regard. So, thank you, Mr. Muller. Mr. Schumer, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's go back to the waiver list here. So moving into the zoning bylaw, we start at section 3A and B, and these have to do with the allowed principal uses in the applicable zoning district. We're seeking a waiver from this section because multifamily residential use is a forbidden use in the zoning district. We're proposing 20 units of multifamily residential, and a waiver of that section is needed to allow that use. That's fairly straightforward. The next waiver that we're requesting is in section 3B3, which is regulations that are applicable to signs. And we are requesting a waiver of this provision because it provides specifically that in this zoning district, signs are not allowed except by authorization of the select board. My understanding from the previous projects that have gone through this process is that there is a sign permit application that is filed with the building department, and conditions have been prepared for those other projects requiring that we go through that process. We would propose that the same sort of condition be applied in this instance here, which would require review by the building department of any sign that we're proposing for the project at the street level to allow the fire department and anyone trying to find the site where they can access the driveway. And that would be approved by the town as part of the normal sign permit process and shown on final construction plans for this project. The next provision that we're requesting a waiver from is in section 4, subsection A, which has to do with earth materials removal and fill, which requires the Board of Appeals issue a special permit for activities that entail earth removal and fill. We're requesting a waiver from this requirement and that the Board of Appeals approve the filling as shown on the project plans as part of the comprehensive permit for the project. So moving into the next section, this is, I would say, really the meatiest part of our request for waivers, but you'll see here as we go through this that many of these dimensions have not changed from the previous list, and most of them we're proposing to comply with the zoning bylaw requirements. So the third column here, this lists the dimensional requirements of the RA zoning district in which the project is located. The metrics are here and the particular dimensions are here. What we're proposing is listed here. So as you can see, the lot area is just over 40,000 feet. It is compliant. The frontage is compliant at 151 feet. The front yard setback has been changed significantly from the previous list of requested waivers. And I'll put up in just a moment when I get through this, Mr. Chair, a dimensional comparison so you can see what the changes are to this section. The front yard setback that we're now proposing is 115.4 feet. The requirement is 30 feet, so we're several times in excess of that. The side yard setbacks are now compliant as well at 19.8 feet and 15 feet to the side yard, to the side lot lines. The one new request for a waiver here, Mr. Chair, is the rear yard setback. We're now requesting 23.7 feet to the rear of the site, which backs up to the Curry College property. Building coverage, we are currently at 28.8%, which is, I'll show you in a moment, is a slight reduction from the previous proposal. We are proposing 64.3% gross floor area, which also is a slight reduction from the previous proposal. And the proposed open space for the site is 20,935 square feet, which is compliant with the zoning requirements for this site. If I may, I will switch over to a different window which shows a comparison of the current proposal and the previous proposal. Can you see that, Mr. Chair? Okay, so this is the previous proposal, and I've compared it here to the current proposal. The numbers indicated in bold and in red were requests for waivers. So you can see here, this was previously 24. It's now over 115 feet. Previously, we were at 19 and 11.6 feet, slightly higher at 19.8 and 15, bringing both of those into compliance. 42 feet to the rear yard was the previous proposal. We're now proposing to change that to push the project closer to the rear line, away from the residential neighbors along Brush Hill Avenue. So that is a new waiver request here. The building coverage you can see here is slightly lower than the previous proposal due to the consolidation of the building, and the gross floor area is down by a little bit more than looks like 10%. The open space is also slightly higher here at just over 20,000 square feet. So I will go then back to the waiver list here. So perhaps it makes sense, Mr. Chair, to pause there to ask if you or the other members have any questions about that, the dimensions.
Questions from the members?
No questions.
No questions.
Okay.
No questions here, Ethan.
Great. Thank you. I'll proceed then. Moving on to the next waiver that we're requesting. This is section 6A1, which limits the number of dwellings per lot to one dwelling on a single lot. This waiver is requested to authorize 20 dwelling units in a single building on one property, and that's fairly straightforward. That more or less captures the same as what we're requesting in the previous waiver that we discussed regarding the use of the property for multifamily. Moving to the next page, the following sections apply a number of supplemental and additional side and rear yard setback requirements, which I've outlined in detail here. As I mentioned previously, the current building is fully compliant with the side yard setback requirements. We have left this waiver request in place to the extent that the retaining walls on the site might be deemed to be a structure within the meaning of the zoning bylaw. So we're requesting that this be authorized to allow the project as shown on the project plans to the extent that they would violate these requirements as stated here, specifically, for example, accessory buildings or buildings within 6 feet of a side yard line. That is the same here with the requirements applicable to rear yards. These are supplemental requirements that apply additional setback requirements in specific instances. We're requesting a waiver of this to authorize the project as shown on the plans with the, I believe it was 23.7 foot setback to the building, to the Curry College property at the rear of the site. Moving to the next page, section 7 pertains to the parking regulations of the zoning bylaw. We have requested a waiver of this section in its entirety to approve the project parking design, the number of spaces, the dimensions of the parking spaces, their locations, their setback, screening, landscaping, lighting, topography, and layout as shown on the site plans, which we have filed with the board. Just a note here, the zoning bylaw does not impose a specific count requirement because the parking requirements are based on allowed uses. As we discussed a few minutes ago, because multifamily residential is not permitted, it doesn't apply a specific parking count for that use in this zoning district. However, by way of comparison, single family residential use requires 2 spaces per unit. We are proposing a ratio of 1.75 spaces per unit, which is 35 parking spaces, 30 of which will be in the project garage, and 5 of them will be on the surface at the front of the building. Moving next to section 8A pertaining to enforcement of the bylaw. This request is, it's simply to confirm that with the waivers that were requested, if the board approves those waivers, that enforcement of the otherwise applicable provisions of the zoning bylaw that are waived by the board's decision here would not be enforced against the project. This is, I would say, a belt and suspenders request just to ensure that the project is not subject to zoning enforcement based on the waivers that are approved if the board does vote to approve them. Moving next to section 8B, this section pertains to the filing of plots and plans. We're requesting a waiver of this. Its technical requirements regarding what project plans and plots are required to contain. Those requirements are superseded by the requirements of Chapter 40B and the regulations under 40B. And we're requesting a waiver of this to approve the content of the plans as provided to the board to date. The next section is section 8C, which pertains to issuance of certificates of occupancy. This is another waiver request that we're requesting as I would say belts and suspenders, and it goes along the lines with the enforcement waiver request. We're simply seeking to ensure that certificates of occupancy can be issued by the building department upon approval of those, of course, in accordance with plans that are approved by the Board of Appeals, if the board does vote to approve this project. So the certificates of occupancy would be issued in the same manner in which they are under the state building code, simply in accordance with the waivers that we're requesting and the board's ultimate decision if it does vote to approve this project. Moving next, Mr. Chair, to section 8D. This section requires site plan approval for multifamily buildings and associated uses. We are requesting a waiver of this section. This is another of the, I would just say, process waivers. Much of the board's review of this project has taken the form akin to a site plan review and approval process. So we're requesting that site plan review and approval be contained within the board's comprehensive permit for this project if you do vote to approve one. Finally, the last two are section 9B and C, which have to do with notice requirements to the board. Those are superseded by Chapter 40B and the regulations under that, and are provided under Chapter 40A in accordance with Chapter 40B. We're requesting that the board deem those notice requirements to be acceptable in this instance, and also section 9C, which pertains to special permits. We're requesting a waiver of this section to allow the project to be permitted in accordance with the requirements of 40B. This section has to do with findings for special permits, and as I mentioned before, there are a number of requirements in the zoning bylaw that would have otherwise required the project to obtain special permits, such as for the earth and fill work. So we're requesting that the board issue the findings as may be required under this section as part of the comprehensive permit. So therefore, this would be another of the process waivers that we're requesting. So that, Mr. Chair, is the final section of the zoning bylaw. From there, the remaining waiver requests, there are just a couple, have to do with the Board of Appeals comprehensive permit rules and regulations. We have requested a waiver of this to the extent that the filing requirements differ from the requirements of Chapter 40B, which supersedes the local requirements. We believe that the filing materials that we provided to date do, for the most part, comply with the local filing requirements, and in some instances exceed the requirements. But we're requesting a waiver of this nonetheless, just as belt and suspenders again, to ensure that the filing requirements are deemed acceptable if you do vote to approve this project. I believe there's one more on this page here. This is the Milton Department of Public Works right-of-way regulations, Division 2 right-of-way requirement. This is a waiver request, Mr. Chair, that came up, I believe, if I remember correctly, at some length during the 582 Blue Hill Avenue project, as well as during the 648 Canton Avenue project. The reason for this request is because buried in some length of language, there is technically a requirement under this section, under this bylaw, for the Milton Select Board to issue an additional local permit for the project for work affecting public rights of way. So we have requested this as a process waiver to allow the Board of Appeals to issue that permit in lieu of the Milton Select Board. Now I can report on the 648 Canton Avenue project, and I believe 582 as well. This waiver request was also handled similarly to Mr. Zawinski described with respect to the first waiver that we described about the work in the right of way and the curb cut permit that's required, which would require compliance with performance standards to the extent applicable and review by the appropriate town bodies who review these sorts of permit applications in practical effect. So that, Mr. Chair, that's the conclusion of the waiver list. It's we've done our best to tailor the list of requested waivers just to what we have need for the project, and that's it. That's all we're requesting from the board tonight. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, for any questions you may have for me or members of our team.
Thank you, Mr. Schomer. Certainly a comprehensive list of requested waivers. So let me ask if Mr. Gray or Mr. Mullen have any questions regarding any of the materials that Mr. Schomer has laid out so far. And I see Mr. Mullen has his hand up.
Wondering if there's a parking management plan that's been proposed for the management of the building. You've got 35 spaces for 20 units, which needs to accommodate guest parking, deliveries, etc. And I'm wondering how and whether or not the applicant has thought about limiting the use of the parking by the residents.
We, to answer that question, Mr. Chair, we have not filed a parking management plan, though those I would say are typical for a project like this. Given the limited space on the site and the limited number of parking spaces, we would certainly be willing to provide a parking management plan as a condition of the approval of the project. The specific arrangements, I think, will be determined by building management once we get closer to the actual completion of the project. So I think at the present moment, it's somewhat premature to have a parking management plan, not knowing who will be the actual building manager. But it's something that we've certainly worked on, and we can provide some initial preliminary proposals in terms of how the parking will be managed. My recollection also is that the traffic review and study that was prepared by MDM Transportation recommended the use of a parking management plan. So that's something we're certainly contemplating as something that will be needed for the project as it gets closer to completion, to ensure that the parking does not spill out over the site and onto public streets. We want to keep our parking on the site and ensure that it's adequate and managed adequately to make sure that deliveries are appropriately managed and accommodated, move-ins, move-outs, Ubers, delivery trucks, and also, of course, residential parking and guests.
Yeah, I think the board's going to be looking for something like a limit on the number of spaces that a unit can actually use. If that's not controlled, there will be no parking at the site, and there is no parking in that area, and there's no parking on public ways. So there's going to be a parking problem unless it's limited. You've listened to me enough to know that I don't like parking, but you have a site that requires parking. So I think while I might agree that a full-blown parking management plan, for real operations might not be necessary, I do think they're going to have to be controls on the number of spaces each unit can use, or else no one will be able to visit the site. So that's what I'm encouraging.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mullen. I think at the moment, what I would request to do is to go back and have a conversation with our traffic engineer and our clients and see if we can come up with some details of a proposal to manage the parking in the way that you suggest. And I've certainly seen projects like this that have had limits on the number of parking spaces through what's sometimes called decoupling of parking spaces from units, where the units will have maybe one parking space at most per unit that comes with the rent of the unit, and additional spaces would be something that unit renters would have to rent separately. And that can be a way to discourage multi-car ownership as well as manage the excess spaces. That's something that's certainly done, but I would need to speak with our engineer and our client to see if we're looking to go in that direction. So I'll commit to having a response to you on that at the next meeting, Mr. Mullen.
Thank you.
Jeff, do you have any additional questions? Your hand's still up.
My hand is up because I don't know how to put it down.
Mr. Tim Posey, I noticed your hand was up and then down. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, nothing further. Attorney Schomer covered it. We have reviewed the parking with our traffic engineer, and we'll continue to do so and answer some of the questions Mr. Mullen raised. I would just note that the parking ratio of 1.75 spaces per unit is above what the Institute for Traffic Engineers recommends for multifamily buildings. And those recommendations do include visitors as well as deliveries and that type of typical uses. So we'll provide some further information on that as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's a traffic issue. It's a marketing issue, right? So let's just make sure we've got a parking plan. Otherwise, you're going to have a parking problem. So, and it's fine with me if you think about it and get back to the board, but I think we're going to need that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Schumer?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. So we've got the initial exposure, the waiver, the revised waiver list. We've gone through some of the most of the engineering stuff. Mr. Schomer, are there any additional engineering related issues that you want to mention at this particular point in time, or do you prefer to await comment on those for the comprehensive response that you're preparing?
I don't have anything further, Mr. Chair. Our civil engineer, Paul Matos from Allen and Major, is on the line. So if he has anything he'd like to discuss, Paul, feel free to come on, or if you're all set, just let us know.
Yeah, I have no comments.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chair, we'll as I said, we'll provide written responses to Mr. Bearden's letter and continue to work with him and the town engineer and the fire chief to iron out the remaining issues. But I think we don't have any major concerns at this point in terms of the feedback that we've received. We'll make the modifications that are necessary and submit those for record.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schomer. So, Mr. Sawinski, do you have any additional comments that you'd like to make at this time?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay. With that, I'm going to ask the board's administrative assistant to peruse the attendee list and to see if there are any members of the public who would like to make comments at this point in time. So, Ms.
Okay.
Rich?
Yes, there is C. Newman. I'm just going to move that person over. And Burnett. Okay.
All right. Ms. On my screen, it says C. Newman. I don't recall who that person is, so there's no picture.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know how to put the picture on the screen, so I guess I'll just be verbal here.
Thank you. Thank you for being verbal because you answered the first question if I would call you sir or ma'am. So welcome to the Board of Appeals, and if you wouldn't mind, just for the record, stating your name and address.
Certainly. My name's Charles Newman, and I live at 939 Brush Hill, which is directly across the street from the proposed project.
Thank you, Mr. Newman, and welcome back to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. I just have several questions or several comments and then perhaps some questions. First of all, I hope that the plans, the final drawn plans, whatever that attorney was representing would be filed in time for sufficient review as opposed to just a day or two before the August 3rd committee, or if the August 3rd committee meeting will be delayed, we could have time to review those plans. The second is I wanted to clarify Mr. Day's situation. Mr. Day has been on holiday, and so he is unable at this point to produce those written comments. We expect him to do that, but if the chief has provided the minutes or the recording of the minutes of that 10-minute discussion, that would be helpful. But we really do wish and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to meet with the chief so we can voice those concerns. The questions that I have, in perhaps out of naivete, but when I look at the waiver list, you know, I see that the coverage is going from almost double, from 15%, which is the regulations, to 30%, which is literally double. And the gross coverage is going from 30% to 64%. Seems to me that is a huge deviation from the regulations, and I hope that the committee will take that into consideration as it views those waivers in greater detail. The question I have is the fact that, you know, this is zoned for one house per plot, going from 1 to 20. I mean, we are obviously opposed to the project, but the density of that on that small parcel of ground continues to concern us. So again, as you consider those waivers, I hope you do take that into consideration. And the parking, you got 20 units. Some of those units are 3-bedroom. So the number of people who will be living in those 20 units, I don't know how 1.75 would be sufficient. And quite honestly, if they have a problem with parking, I have a problem with parking because I'm right out across the street. And that's where those cars are going to be pulling up at 1 or 2 in the morning and parking because there's no available spots within the lot. So that concerns me a great deal. That, sir, are my comments for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Appreciate your comments, your attendance, and your continued participation in this. And please be assured that the members of the board will, as we always do in every hearing, certainly take into consideration your comments as well as the comments of the materials presented by folks, as well as the range of waivers and of the materials that are provided.
We appreciate that. Thank you for your efforts.
Thank you for your comments again. So at this point in time, I'm going to see if Mr. Burnett is available and if he would like to speak.
Yes, I am available. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome back to the Board of Appeals.
Hi, so for the record, my name is Stefan Burnett. I live at 924 Brush Hill Road, so directly abutting the project under discussion. I basically wanted to say the same thing as Chuck in this one. The deviation proposed by the waivers required are not detailed. They are major changes to what is the norm for this area. There's also items that were discussed last meeting, on the June 20 meeting, that were presented by John Chesia, our engineer, who mentioned that the test pits that had been dig was left some questions to the nature of the soil, and that is not by any means proven how the entire project can be done without causing damage to neighborhood properties in terms of the soil moving, the potential blasting that would be required. And that is something that I would like to see studied further also. The main thing that I wanted to point out is the same thing that again, Chuck brought up is this entire process right now is taking place. The remaining meetings on schedule are scheduled for the height of the summer vacation. Even some members of the board may not be able to attend all the meetings. So when there was a request to extend the September 5 deadline, I would like to know how where we stand on that, and if we are going to be able to plan at least one meeting for the September timeframe, so that we can adequately discuss the question that are raised, which again are not trivial. The question raised by Dwayne Day, the retired fire chief for the Boston area, who made his concerns, are by no means trivial. The questions about damage to the building properties are not trivial. The question about the visibility and the recommendation that the board even takes, takes a walk, does a site visit and observe the view at that time of the year from the street. These are not minor details. I would like to know, get confirmation that we are planning at least one meeting in the September timeframe to give us time to properly answer these questions. And that's all I had to say at this time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. Thank you for your continued participation, active participation in the hearing. So you asked a number of questions here, and I think one of the things that was talked about, and I'm going to ask Mr. Reardon perhaps to touch bases just in a little bit greater detail on the test pit issue. There was a letter filed. There were 2 additional test pits done. I think Mr. Reardon, if I recall correctly, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the test pits assuage some of your concerns.
Yes, definitely. And John and I shared that same opinion that prior to the most recent round of test pits, they had 2 test pits that were spread out very different ends of the site, didn't really give a good representation of what you might expect throughout the site. And most importantly, didn't comply with standards which require a test pit within the footprint of the system. So that they've done 2 new test pits, so basically doubling what they had before. And both of those test pits are within the footprint of the proposed system. And both of those test pits confirm the information that was in the other test pits. So we have 4 relatively consistent test pits, all reflecting sort of the same underground conditions and in supporting the design that's been done so far.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon. Mr. Shermer, is there anything you'd like to add, or would you like to wait for your comprehensive response?
Nothing to add at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shermer. Relative to some of the fire-related issues that were mentioned by both Mr. Newman and Mr. Burnett, we will be dealing with those in due course. I think it's fair to say that they are front of mind for members of the board and others involved with this. And certainly we all as members of the board, take the concerns and comments from anyone who appears before the board, expresses concerns or makes comments. We do give them due consideration, and there's nothing here that is unimportant to the board or to someone who appears before the board. We all give everything due consideration. Relative to the continuation of this hearing past the potential drop dead date of September 5th, that is to be determined. Mr. Burnett's point relative to August vacations and whatnot are well taken. I've mentioned that. Mr. Shermer has mentioned that. I do think that we will be able to come to an accommodation, I think, relative to this. I see Mr. Shermer shaking his head. Yes, And I would hope that we'll be able to come to an accommodation on that relatively soon. So with that, Ms. Rich, are there any other persons who have asked to be recognized at this particular point in time?
I have Mr. Newman again with his hand up and Laurie McIntosh.
We will go to Mr. Newman first and then Ms. McIntosh. So Mr. Newman.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. O'Brien, I'm sorry. I thought I brought my hand down. I had said what I needed to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. McIntosh.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Just for the record, Ms. McIntosh, I know you've been before the board before, but if you wouldn't mind just stating your name and address for the record.
Sure, yes. I'm Laurie McIntosh. I live at 77 Cushing Road. Cushing Road is almost directly across from the proposed project. It's diagonal. And I'm president of our Cushing Road Neighborhood Association, which is a subset of the Brush Hill Road Neighborhood Association. And I would just like,
welcome back to the board.
Thank you, thank you. I would like to make two comments. One goes off of what Charles Newman said earlier about the parking. It is, especially with his example of the 3-bedroom, it's clearly not enough. What will happen is it will not only spill over onto Brush Hill Road, but it will spill over onto our street, which we do not want. And this just further supports our comments from several meetings ago. I'm not sure the exact date, but where we said that we feel that this project should be 12 units, not 20. If there were 12, there would be ample underground parking for the unit residents and their guests, and this parking then on Brush Hill Road and Cushing Road would not be an issue. So that's my first point. And the second thing is a comment that was touched on at one meeting, but I don't think, at least I don't recall there being a discussion of what is going to happen. And that is, where are the trucks going to come during construction? There's only 2 access areas. One is Brush Hill Road, which is a no truck zone. The other is up our street, Cushing Road, from Hyde Park, and we are also a no truck zone. So we're very concerned about that and would like that addressed in detail, please.
Thank you, Ms. McIntosh. I distinctly remember your comment regarding trucks and whatnot, so rest assured that has not been forgotten. So appreciate your returning to the Board of Appeals and providing your additional comments. So is there anything else you'd like to add at this time?
Those are the 2 points for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming before the board. We appreciate your input. Is there anyone else, Ms. Rich, who has asked to be recognized?
No, there is not.
Thank you. So I think at this point in time that it's time to hand out some homework assignments and to begin the process of thinking about what we want to accomplish at the next meeting. And I think first and foremost, at least at the next meeting, Attorney Schumer, I would like to see your comprehensive response to, the board would like to see your comprehensive response to the comments that were raised at the last hearing by Attorney Galvin and his experts. And if I recall correctly as well, in addition to that, a survey will be in process.
That's right, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
It is in process now.
Okay. So do you anticipate being able to have those materials and the associated plans filed in sufficient time for the board to be able to review them in advance of its next hearing scheduled for August 3rd?
August 3rd, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure we can commit to being complete by that, just primarily because we're still waiting the final confirmation for when the survey will be done. That's not being done by Allen and Major, that's being done by outside survey. So I'm not sure if we plan for an August 3rd meeting that will be coming back to you with the information that you're looking for in time for that. Certainly not within enough time for everyone to review it, and we're certainly sensitive to that. The need to do that for Mr. Reardon to be able to review that, and the neighbors and Attorney Galvin as well. So what I would propose, Mr. Chair, is since the submission that we're contemplating is intended to be our final submission of plans and really the definitive plan set for this project, my suggestion, Mr. Chair, would be that we take the month of August off. I'm sure all of us have a number of vacation conflicts that are probably coming up. I believe that was mentioned for yourself, Mr. Chair, at one point. The second meeting in August, I think it was not going to be an available date for you. So I would suggest that we come back either the first or the second week of September, and we're certainly willing to extend the public hearing to accommodate that additional public hearing to have all the submission materials in your hands well in advance of that. And if all of the outstanding items are resolved at that night, we would request that the hearing be closed at that time. However, if there are additional matters that need to be decided, we're certainly willing to work with the board to provide extensions if they're necessary to tie up any loose ends that we've not been able to resolve on our end.
Thank you, Mr. Shermer. Appreciate that offer. Let me ask members of the board for their reaction to it. Mr. Gray?
I think deferring until meetings through, not meeting in August is probably a wise decision. I guess I wanted to ask my fellow board members if the last comment raised the issue of a reduction of a number of units in this project. And I know that that is a sensitive issue, and that if the board were, the board's ability to reduce a number of units in a project in under 40B is extremely limited. And I was wondering if the board felt it needed testimony from the applicant on the financial feasibility of any reduction in units.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Mr. Mullen, any reactions, comments?
I don't know the answer to Nick's very good question. I suppose if we are going to be considering a reduction in units and we're at the point where it's appropriate to raise that, then it would be a financial question, as that's how I understand it works under the regulations. I hadn't thought that through before you just raised it, so I don't have a smart comment.
What I'm trying to avoid is the situation we had in another meeting where we weren't really able to get the testimony that we needed on that topic because of ran out of time before the deadline. So I don't know whether it's an issue in this one, but I thought I'd mention it since the topic came up this evening.
Yeah, I don't know. In terms of the postponing August, I mean that's fine with me. But am I hearing that the deadline then moves to October?
Mr. Mullen, we would propose that we move the close of the hearing to whatever the date that we schedule, and I would suggest that be changed to September 7th or to September 14th. And the reason why that is, I think at this point, all of the evidence, at least from our end, is in the record or will be by that point. So I'm not sure how much more we have to discuss, frankly, during the hearing. And we know that the neighbors have a number of concerns still, and we've done our best to resolve those. But I think we're reaching the close of the evidence of the hearing. So we don't feel that it's necessary to extend much beyond one more meeting.
Well, I know, but if we do that, then the board's not going to have an opportunity to talk about the hearing in public session and to take additional testimony to address the questions that are raised. And, versus closing the hearing and then debating the merits, but not being able to take evidence. So
I think that might cut you a little short. I mean, I guess the long way of saying I would not be in favor of taking a month off to only extend the deadline for a week. I think we've had too many situations where that we just run out of time. So, you know, and I do appreciate the opportunity to give the applicant and the neighbors and everybody an indication of where this is headed while the hearing is still open for the purpose of clarifying and taking additional testimony. But once we close that hearing, we're not taking any more testimony. So, you know, and then debating the merits, you know. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer for that, but those are my thoughts, Frank.
So from my point of view, I certainly, as a matter of convenience and indeed a little bit relative to public access, I think suspending the hearing, recessing the hearing for the month of August, makes a lot of sense. I am deeply troubled, however, by a suggestion that once we reconvene in September, that there would just be an opportunity for one or two hearings. One or two hearings may be all we need. However, I share the concerns that Mr. Gray and Mr. Mullen have mentioned. I don't want to continue this ad nauseum. I really don't. And I do agree with you, Mr. Schumer, that much of the evidence has been placed. However, I do think that Mr. Galvin and some of the others may have some additional material. So I am concerned about putting an artificial deadline on this. However, as I said, the applicant deserves a decision, and the applicant deserves a timely decision, one way or the other. So I don't want to continue this forever. However, as I said, I think that there could be some additional materials that come up in any September hearings. So while I appreciate the offer and would look forward to accepting that offer, I sense concern on the part of the board that any such offer or any such agreement would be conditioned on a limit of one or two additional hearings.
I guess I don't have much more to add to that, Mr. Chair, from what I previously said. From our perspective, the evidence is 95% of the way in the record, and the remaining 5%, in our view, will be in the record by or before the next hearing. So, I certainly respect the neighbors, Mr. Newman. I'm sorry, not Mr. Newman, Mr. I'm forgetting his last name. Mr. Burnett, tonight mentioned that they remain opposed to the project. We're disappointed by that, and we understand that they're participating. We appreciate their participation. We value their opinions about the project, but as you know, Mr. Chair, and the board members know, the neighbors' concerns is really only half of the equation. The other half of the equation is the need for affordable housing in the town of Milton, and that's really what the board has to assess. And at this point, I don't think it would be productive to have meeting after meeting where the neighbors express the same opinions that they've expressed at previous hearings. I think it's understood what the neighbors' opinion is about the project. They don't want it. They don't like it. They think it's too big and too close. We respect their opinion, but we disagree about that. We've gone through an extensive review process with the peer reviewers, and have done our best to resolve their concerns as well as the town department heads' concerns. So in our view, the project works. We think we're pretty close to being there, and we think that we will be there by the next meeting. So I don't see a value in extending this further. If I'm wrong about that and we come to September 7 or September 14 and a hearing, it comes up that there's another issue that we need to resolve on our end and provide more information. At that time, I think we'd be willing to extend the hearing further. But tonight, we'd really like the next hearing to be the final.
Thank you, Mr. Schumer. Appreciate your the exposition of your point of view. Can understand where the applicant is coming from, but I'm not willing to tie the hands of the board, and I think the other members of the board are in the same boat relative to this, and maybe given the existing time frame that we are, it's much ado about nothing, but I do think that there is value in having more than one additional hearing. I am concerned about tying the hands of the board by setting what I would think would be an artificial deadline, particularly since we would be canceling at least one, possibly two hearings during the month of August. So I think at the very least, having two additional hearings, given that's the current schedule, would be something that I would encourage the applicant to consider.
With that in mind, Mr. Chair, could I propose that we come back on September 7 and have a hearing close date of September 21, which would, I think that would be enough time to have at least two meetings, depending on the day that they're scheduled. And we're certainly willing to accommodate the board on other days of the week if Wednesdays are not available.
September 7th is not available. Any other day that week, though, would be. The Wednesdays are just, they've been rotating with the other projects. So this project scheduled for the 14th, September 14th.
And thank you, Crystal. In that case, Mr. Chair, could I revise the proposal and say 14 and then the close of the hearing on the 28th? If the 28th is available or some other day.
Yeah, the 28th is not available.
We could try to schedule something around the 28th.
Yes.
I mean, I understand what you're suggesting, but we could work out the details. Mr. Mullen, Mr. Gray, any reaction to that?
I'm in favor of not closing the hearing until the board has an opportunity to preliminarily discuss the merits of the case so that we can take additional testimony if that's necessary. That may not be possible. That's my issue. On the issue of the reduction of units, Nick, I don't think we're at the point where we can do that. So I don't think
I'm just responding to what I heard. That's all.
Yeah, no, I hear you, but I don't think the record is such that we've asked for the project to be modified and the applicant has claimed that those modifications make it uneconomic, which is what triggers the economic review. So, I mean, maybe that happens at the next hearing, but it hasn't happened yet. I would ask, I mean, maybe that's a good opportunity for Sean and probably Cliff Bomer to give us some advice. That's how it's manifested before. But other than the comment we've heard tonight, it really hasn't come up in the context that would trigger that kind of review. At least that's how I understand it to work. But
no, I agree with that. I'm just trying to establish, for the board's sake, that the parameters under which we have to operate in this context, where a reduction of units is considered, right?
Oh yeah. And we won't have time to do that if that happens. But I know these are related but separate issues as well. Frank, I mean, I think that's better than coming. I wouldn't favor taking August off to have the board get jammed in September. So I'm against that. If we think we can get our work done in September, the way that Attorney Schumer recommended it or proposed it, and we're really only talking about a couple of days because I had been expecting this hearing to close in September.
then I don't think I could reasonably object to that, you know? And it could be that if on the 14th, several issues remain outstanding and we can't get a hearing at the 28th or the 29th or whatever the right date is, and this kicks into October, I would expect the applicant to accommodate that. Without with recognizing that there's not a firm commitment. I mean, that's where, I think that's reasonable, particularly in light of the testimony tonight from the neighbors is saying that people aren't available in August. Sadly, I will be, but that's a whole different issue.
As will I, sadly.
Yeah.
I think that what you've laid out, Mr. Mullen, is a reasonable accommodation and a reasonable direction to go. And I do believe that I agree with you, taking August off on this, but however, getting jammed up in September is not an optimal solution. But Mr. Schomer, what I hear from you is a willingness to work with the board in a reasonable manner to schedule things appropriately moving forward. Is that a fair summation?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. We're certainly willing to work with the board. We're not trying to tie your hands, but at the same time, I'm sure you understand we do want to bring this hearing to a close. So as I said before, if there are issues, last minute things that come up and we need to resolve them, at that time we will certainly be willing to extend the hearing if needed to tie up those loose ends. So yes, I agree. I think that's a reasonable approach. Just if I may also just to comment real briefly on the issue of reducing units. Mr. Millen did describe the procedure correctly, and I would suggest that you speak with your MHP technical consultant Judy Barrett about the specifics of that. I won't recite to you the procedure. What I would say is that we're really not there at this point in the hearing yet, and that just to remind you that if the board does want to go down that road of considering reduction of units, the request to reduce the units would need to be tied with a specific local concern and not just based on the desire to reduce units for the sake of reducing units. So for that reason, that's really why we do our best to go through the peer review process and resolve as many as possible of the peer reviewers' concerns. Obviously, the board is the deciding body on this project, but from our perspective, the local concern issues have been satisfactorily addressed for the most part and to the extent possible. So if the board would like to go down the road of requesting the project pro forma, there is a procedure for that, and Judy can go through that with you.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. We appreciate your you adding the value of your extensive expertise in this area for the board's edification. So thank you for that. And of course, the board will avail of itself of any and all resources that may be appropriate in terms of dealing with this or indeed any other issue, particularly the expertise of our peer reviewers and the other experts who the board has consulted in the past. And we appreciate you reminding us of that procedure. I think what I hear is a willingness on the part of the board and the applicant to recess the hearing for the month of September and to reconvene on a date on or around September 7th. It's my understanding from Ms. Rich that September 7th, the in and of itself is unavailable.
Yes, it is.
What is available?
Any other day that week. It's just, as of right now, just the 7th.
All right. How about the 8th?
Yeah, it's good for me.
Okay.
Let me just make sure it's good for me.
It's okay for me.
And we have bingo. So September 8th it is. So we will continue this hearing until September 8th. In the meantime, however, again, I would expect, Mr. Schumer, as I mentioned at the beginning, your summation, if you will, your response to the well, not your summation, but your response to the concerns that were raised at the last hearing. The other thing that I would also expect to be made available at the hearing in September would be whatever additional materials or comments are emanating from the fire chief related comments. If I can characterize them as that, I think we're all aware of what is involved there. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that brought to a close, or not a close, brought to some form, so that we can have some consensus, or at least the beginning of an end of the discussion on that. We'll also need to continue to deal with some of the waivers, and we'll also there'll be other issues as well. So that would be so Schumer, the homework assignments for you relatively clear at this point?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Mr. Molland.
We want some parking information.
Thank you.
On my list, Mr. Mullen.
As well as the survey materials. I had mentioned those as well. Is there anything else that I have neglected to mention?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chair. I think that's everything. The responses to the peer review comment letters, the neighbors, consultants as well, and the updated plans in accordance with those responses is what we're intending to file before the next hearing. And our team are all on the call here tonight, so they're hearing what the board members are asking for loud and clear, and that those materials should be in as soon as possible, so everyone has as much time as possible to review. So that's my commitment to you, Mr. Chair, and to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Schumer. All right. Any other questions or comments from any other members of the board? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to bring tonight's hearing to a close. The next hearing of this board will be on September 8th at 7 p.m. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening.
All right, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.